while your day is winding down. They're just getting started. This is South Coast Tonight with Chris McCarthy and Marcus Farrow. They've got you covered on all the news of the day, from local issues to politics on both sides of the aisle. This is the place where the movers and shakers come to be heard, to listen, and where they're held accountable. This is South Coast Tonight on WBSM.
Welcome back to South Coast Tonight. I'm Marcus. 508-996-0500 is how you can get in the program. Open phone lines for the rest of the show. We had Kathy Daner, Ward 3 City Council candidate, on to talk about her campaign. She previously was on the Ward 3 City Council. She previously was the Ward 3 City Councilor. And she is running again for Ward 3 City Council. Again, I spoke with her off the air, and on the air seemed very nice and genuine. Had some, I think interesting institutional experience as being on the council before, and private sector experience, being a realtor and having experience in real estate and all of that, which I think is an important area to know, especially at a time when there's a significant amount of development projects and need for more development projects in the ward and in the city more broadly. But 508-996-0500 is how you can get in the program. What I wanted to talk about today was, I want to talk about a few things, but we'll take your calls, open phone lines for whatever you want to talk about. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that a major milestone in South Coast Rail happened today. There was it's basically arrived, right? The Freetown station has been fully completed. Governor Charlie Baker, along with members of the state delegation, have took the train down to the Freetown platform. I saw just on the ribbon cutting. I wasn't able to make it today, but I saw the ribbon cutting. There were a bunch of members of the South Coast delegation, obviously, Paul Schmidt and Carol Fiola, who both represent Freetown in the state legislature. There's Bill Strauss, who is the chairman of transportation. There's Chris Hendricks from New Bedford was there. Mike Rodricks, who represents Freetown in the state senate, he was there. Steve Poftak, the outgoing manager of the MBTA, was there. And Karen Polito was there too. I think a big legacy project for Charlie Baker, because Charlie Baker, when he first ran in 2010, was originally against South Coast Rail. And then in 2014, when he ran again, and I think had come around to the issues and probably had seen that his vote share in the South Coast was probably significantly impacted by the fact that he was against South Coast Rail, came around to the project, and I think has been a great steward for it, and has helped make. I mean, it's been a decades long project. The work of Bill Strauss, chairman of transportation, the work of Senator Montigny and Senator Rodricks and Rep. Cabral and the members of the South Coast delegation. I think it's been, a decades-long project, and finally it's looking like it's going to pay off, because a train did arrive to the South Coast. It arrived to Freetown. Now, it's apparently the rail service is expected to be in November of 2023. Rail service for the South Coast Rail. Even though Freetown's project's been completed, full rail service, I believe, for Freetown, New Bedford, and Fall River is still slated for November, I think around this time. So basically a year from now, you will be able to take the train to Boston. It seems like I remember talking about this issue when I first started working here, like 4 years ago, when I was first just a contributor. And one of the very first articles I wrote is about how, Massachusetts transit is a mess. Massachusetts has one of the Boston in particular, the Boston metro area has the worst traffic congestion in the entire country. They usually do. I think DC's up there. DC is up there. New York, obviously, but a lot of those other major metros, New York, who has whatever 10 million people. Houston has like 3 million people. I've been to Houston. I've been on their their interstate highway and their transit system. There's a lot more people, so it can get pretty bad, but it's a lot. Houston is so much more navigable than Boston is. A lot of that has to do with Boston's, they're not a grid. Their streets aren't a grid. It's a sort of a dated interstate highway system and state highway system that basically leads to a big bottlenecking up on Route 24 and Route 3 and all of that going up into Boston. It's basically just a big bottleneck. And so I believe the average commuter loses about, this was data from 4 years ago, but the average commuter loses about $2,900, about 20, I'm looking up the figure right now. I had this, is about $2,900 a year in lost wages from commuting up to Boston. And I think that, I got it. So average commuter loses about, this is going to be big for people who want to commute up to Boston. People who want to, it'll first of all provide job opportunities for people on the South Coast that want to work in Boston, right? Because taking the train, I think, is a lot easier. You don't have to budget as much time as you do for driving. And you can also do a lot when you're on the train. You could sleep more if you want, or you could be more productive if you want, do work, right? You could read. You have better ways of occupying your time. You don't have to deal with the stress of being in Boston traffic jams. I remember when I was still a solo practice attorney, and I took a few cases up in Boston. I would always leave as early as I could, but still manage to be just a few minutes late to court because, you have to go in rush hour traffic. It takes like 2.5 to 3 hours. So I think it's going to provide a lot of opportunity. And I think in an area like Boston, I think that bringing the Boston metro area in particular, I think loses $9 billion in lost wages annually because the MBTA. They have to bring the MBTA in a state of good repair, right? So a lot of this does have to come with MBTA overhauls, and I think that's going to be a signature issue. I think it's going to have to be a signature issue for Governor-elect Maura Healey's first term. In her second term, if she's reelected in 2028, because is it 2028? It's 2022 now. 2026. I'm sorry, 2026, because the MBTA, I think Boston loses about $9 billion in lost wages annually because they need to bring the MBTA in a state of good repair. But Boston's still the most congested traffic area in the country. 2,900 in lost wages per commuter per year from driving up to Boston. Massachusetts biotech industry is growing at like a 35% over the last 10 years or so. And, even though that industry is growing, Boston's becoming the life sciences hub of the world, and that's providing a lot more opportunities. Even with the expansive economic growth in Boston, it's growing beyond what the transit system can what the transit system can sustain at this point. So we're going to see, I think, with SouthCoast Rail when it comes in next year, a significant amount of economic opportunity, not just for people here, but more broadly. I think it's going to allow people that might be up in the Boston suburbs that want to move back down here an ability to do that while having a tenable commute up to the city. Like I said before, I think anybody that's driven up there during rush hour knows. I remember when I had an office space up there, I used to schedule my appointments accordingly with clients so that I could manage the traffic, right? So I'd schedule it later so I could leave at like 9 o'clock, right? It's just so I could meet my clients. I think a lot of people are experiencing similar problems. It was a little bit alleviated due to COVID, during COVID. Obviously it became much more navigable. But now that a lot of people are returning back to work, there is still more remote. There is still more remote, opportunities for work. But I think most people are going back to the office, and that traffic congestion, I think, pretty quickly returned as soon as the Commonwealth started phasing out of COVID. So this is phase one of SouthCoast Rail, by the way, that's going to provide the line from New Bedford and to New Bedford and Fall River. And it's going to be, they project about a 90 minute commute, I think, from either station. It does provide a pretty complicated route, but they're going to move to phase two at a certain point. And phase two is the more desired Stoughton route. The more desired Stoughton route, and the Stoughton route, I believe, is a 77 minute commute up to a 77 minute commute up to Boston. But there was some environmental concerns with that. I think there was some financial, I think there was some also financial interest against that for some reason. I think the rail went through some donors, certain high priority donors' backyards or neighborhoods through the Stoughton route. But when they get the Stoughton route going, that's really going to optimize the growth for SouthCoast Rail for Boston. So I thought it was really promising that to finally see the train come down to the South Coast, come down to Freetown, and we're seeing the platforms being built actually in Ward 3 over by Wamsutta Mills. The platforms are being built now, and they should be ready by 2023. So it's a very exciting development, and I'm looking forward to it, honestly. I don't go up to Boston much. I try to catch a Celtics game and all of that, even though it's getting a bit more expensive. But I would probably go to Boston more if the train were a lot closer. Like Middleborough's okay. I remember when I was doing a training for court-appointed attorneys up in Boston in the financial district. It was a decent walk away. It was about a 10-minute walk from South Station, where this train was going to end up. It's going to end up in South Station. It's a decent walk, but going to Middleborough, adding that extra half hour onto my commute, as opposed to, really for me, where I live in town, especially, about a 5-minute commute, I think is really going to optimize not just my chances of going up there, but a lot of people's chances going up there. Because I remember doing that Middleborough commute. I'd wake up early in the morning, catch the train, get there, I'd get the train back, but it would still be another like half-hour drive. And sometimes there's traffic in that area too. You got to go out down 140 and all of that. It is that extra 15 minutes per day is really going to make a significant amount of difference in a lot of people's commutes. And I think you're going to really see that promise. So I was really excited to see the train come down to Freetown. And I know there's been a lot of pessimism. This is, by the way, made possible by New Bedford and Fall River's vote on the MBTA district this fall. We talked about this. I had people on that were supportive of it, elected officials, organizers of groups that were in favor of it, the Rail to Boston Coalition, and all of that. And this is why it was important, because Taunton didn't have to vote. They were already an MBTA district because they bordered the town of Lakeville. But now that New Bedford and Fall River which both border the town of Freetown, are MBTA districts. Freetown, Fairhaven, and Dartmouth, I believe, because of their status as a bordering town, are given MBTA status. So it was really important, and I think it was great that the city responded. Both cities responded in such an overwhelmingly positive way for South Coast Rail. I believe it was like an 80-20 vote in favor of making New Bedford an MBTA district. We were worried that there'd be increasing pessimism. I think the information campaign for the MBTA district wasn't really all that robust, but it ended up being pretty good. Ended up being a pretty good result, I think, to show that overwhelmingly these communities were in support. Even though if both cities had voted it down, there would have the state legislature probably would have just overridden it and saying, we spent $600 million on this. We're not going to just turn on it because, people decided in this one election that we're going to be against it. But I think it sends a good message to the greater Boston area, to areas that may want to invest in the South Coast, in the surrounding towns because of South Coast Rail, that there is an overwhelming demand for rail service, for access, not just access to Boston, but for Boston to be able to access the South Coast. And I think that's what's important. I think that was a very positive thing. And again, couldn't be more encouraged. I'm sure sometime in the next year or so, there will be a similar ceremony down here in New Bedford for the New Bedford station and in the Fall River station as well. But giving a lot of props to our state delegation, who, not just Governor Baker, Governor Pat, because it's been a long project, right? Not just Governor Baker, but Governor Patrick before him, but for the state delegation, who have over time, I think, expensed a great deal of political capital in service to making this a reality, knowing how important this rail service is to the city. And I had to just the region in general. When I had somebody from Transportation for Massachusetts come on, they talked about how Worcester got a train service in the early to mid 90s, and after that there has been a correlative economic growth in Worcester. Worcester has seen a great deal of economic growth over the past 2 decades, and the South Coast has definitely lagged behind in that because there isn't a good access to Boston. I mean, there is access to the major metro area of Providence, which is important for the South Coast, but Worcester has both, right? Worcester is pretty easily accessible, isn't that far from Providence, and has easier Boston access. And now that the South Coast is going to have that, I think you're going to see a lot more opportunity and a lot more development here in those areas, in the Hicks-Logan area in particular too, where that train station is going to be built. And that's another important issue that's going to be in this Ward 3 City Council race. So 508-996-0500 is how you can get in the program. We're also taking your messages on the WBSM app chat. I'm going to take a break and we'll be back. This is South Coast Tonight. I'm Marcus. Back to South Coast Tonight. I'm Marcus, 508-996-0500. So beyond South Coast Rail, I know Rep. Califriola had joked. Actually, she was probably being sincere that the arrival of South Coast Rail is a much bigger event for people here than the arrival of the royal family. But the royal family coming was pretty notable for a few reasons. Listen, I've never made a big deal out of I've really never made a big deal out of the royal family. I've never seen it as, I've never understood why people make such a big deal out of the royal family, but I don't understand why they have as much power and influence as they do. I mean, I understand why, I just don't like it, right? But it doesn't change the fact that that they do have a significant amount of impact on world events, right? And so the royal family came to Boston, and the reason they came to Boston was to promote to have their Earthshot Awards, their Earthshot Award ceremony. And they thought it was the reason they did it here. So the reason they did it here was basically because this is what they said. The reason they did it here is because Boston, and I talked about this, I alluded to this a little bit earlier. Boston is an area in particular that is not just a national hub, but a global hub for science and innovation, right? With Harvard and MIT and BU and BC and, you know, all the life sciences industries, even UMass System's one of, if not the best state university system in the entire country. Even you're in still close proximity to, you know, prestigious universities like Brown, right? And they say the reason that Prince William had said the reason why they chose Boston is because of that, right? And because of JFK. Now, Earthshot is basically, you know, a nonprofit initiative that they have that helps fund efforts that will that will move forward more sustainable options to combat the global climate crisis. And the title Earthshot is a homage to JFK's moonshot, right? And the Kennedy family does have some ties to Great Britain because Joe Kennedy, JFK's father, was the ambassador to Great Britain under FDR. And JFK wrote a book called Why England Slept when he was 22 years old and a student at the London School of Economics. There's some speculation they didn't write it, but whatever. But it alludes to JFK's moonshot initiative, which he had launched in the 1960s, which was basically to put a man on the moon, right? Within the decade, put a man on the moon within the decade. Now, he didn't live long enough, obviously, to see that through, but President Nixon did, I believe, in 1969. I think it was 1969. Yeah, I believe it was 1969. Did put a man on the moon. You'll remember Neil Armstrong and John Glenn, right? John Glenn ended up being a senator. And, you know, you remember Kennedy's speech, we choose to go to the moon and do the other things, not because they're easy, but because they're hard. Nixon actually famously, they put a plaque there and it, you know, commemorated, I think it had President Nixon's name on it, but it was seen as, I guess, petty and reflective on Nixon's character that JFK's name wasn't on it, because it was really JFK's conceptualization and inspiration that helped see that project through. But in any event, they had the Earthshot Awards. I believe it was this past Saturday. You saw a lot of people, a lot of, you know, Massachusetts notables. I mean, the royal family was in Boston for a few days, so I think everybody saw on the sidelines of a Celtics game. I can't remember if they were playing the Heat or not, but I think they were playing the Heat. I think it was the first game against the Heat that they won, because they ended up losing against the Heat a few days later. Yeah, because it was Wednesday. I believe they were playing the Heat. They won that game, but Maura Healey was on the sidelines with William and Kate Middleton, and Michelle Wu was there as well. And then they had the Earthshot Awards. Obviously, Michelle Wu was there in Boston. Maura Healey was there. Governor Charlie Baker was there. And basically, what it was is a $1.2 million. They allocated $1.2 million to 5 initiatives that were, again, in service to promoting sustainable practices that will help better the environment and combat the global climate crisis. There was a clean air initiative that is providing clean burners. There's $1.2 million total in, I think, grant funding, or I think it was £1 million, right? But, you know, on their currency, the pound. But it was a startup providing there was the clean air one that provided clean burning stoves to women in Kenya to reduce unhealthy indoor pollution and give them a safer way to cook. There was the a project to restore nature in India. So basically, they were pioneering a solution for local smallholder farmers to reduce costs, increase yields, and protect livelihoods in a country from the on the front lines of climate change. There was a Revive Our Oceans initiative that helped Indigenous women in Australia. That basically, they said it combines 60,000 years of knowledge from Indigenous Australians with digital technologies to help protect their land. And that's an interesting one because there's a lot of debate, among there's the indigenous population is, I think, my understanding, particularly not fond of the royal family. And it's because they were colonized by the royal family. They were colonized by the royal family however many hundreds of years ago. And actually every member of the Australian Parliament has to swear a loyalty to the Queen. And there's a fairly famous clip of a recent Indigenous person who was an Indigenous Australian senator. She was an Indigenous person in Australia, and she had to swear her loyalty of oath to the Queen. This is when the Queen was still alive. So now it'd be the King Charles. But swear an oath to the Queen, and she said, I swear my oath instead of saying to the Queen, she said to the colonizer Queen. And then the person administering the oath says, no, you have to read the oath exactly how it's written, otherwise you can't be sworn in. And so she just sort of sarcastically said, I do swear my oath to the Queen. So that, I think, is interesting. Maybe it's some sort of olive branch to a community that they've definitely devastated over a long period of time, and I don't think it makes up for it, but I still think an interesting inclusion in this. There was David Beckham, the famous soccer player. He was awarded a grant. So it's basically to create an alternative plastic packaging from seaweed. So that would make it, I guess, more biodegradable. There's a lot of talk about plastics, right? And how there's talk about the sea turtles and how plastics are ruining the environment, et cetera. And, providing, because they're not biodegradable, it's providing a significant amount of waste, polluting the oceans and all of that. So this seaweed-based plastic packaging is, I guess, an alternative to the other plastic packaging. And then there is one by Rami Malek. Rami Malek is an actor. He was known for his show, Mr. Robot. He also played Freddie Mercury in that biopic about Freddie Mercury. He won an Emmy for Mr. Robot. He won an Oscar for his performance in as Freddie Mercury. But it's basically it was presented by Rain. I'm sorry, these guys were the presenters, David Beckham was the presenter, not the person who started. This was presented by Rami Malek, but it was basically a group of childhood friends who developed an innovative technique to turn CO2 into rock and permanently store it underground. That's interesting. I would probably need to know, how exactly that helps, but it seems like a very interesting development just in earth sciences in general. So those are the Earthshot Awards. I thought it was worth talking about because the royal family did come to Boston to present them. And they found, again, I think the reasonings were pretty solid, that Boston is obviously a hub of innovation, one of the world leaders in science and research in general because of Harvard, MIT, et cetera, and because of, JFK's, aspirations. And Earthshot is a homage to Moonshot, which was JFK's successful, although posthumously on his behalf successful, endeavor to put a man on the moon by the close of the 60s, which again I'm pretty sure happened in 1969, but you can correct me if I'm mistaken. Okay, 508-996-0500 is how we get in the program. Also take your messages on the WBSM app chat. This is South Coast Tonight. I'm Marcus.
Listen to us live anywhere in the world on the WBSM app.
The United States has the highest rate of incarceration in the world. At the Equal Justice Initiative, we believe mass incarceration has to end. There is this presumption of dangerousness and guilt that gets assigned to Black and brown people. We have to confront our history of racial injustice and commit to a new era of truth. There's something better waiting for us, something that feels more like freedom. Truth can inspire change. Please learn more at EJI.org.
On the battlefield, there's a saying America's military men and women live by. Never leave a fallen warrior behind. Ever. Off the battlefield, Wounded Warrior Project operates with the same goal. We leave no warrior behind. Wounded Warrior Project is a non-profit organization created to help our men and women returning home with the scars of war. Whether those scars are physical or mental, we're here to make sure that they heal. And whether it's helping those with post-traumatic stress disorder live a normal life again, or giving much-needed support to injured warriors in veterans' hospitals, because no one deserves our help more than the men and women who risk their lives to keep us safe. Wounded Warrior Project. We never leave a fallen warrior behind. Ever. Learn more about what we do at woundedwarriorproject.org. On the battlefield, there's a saying America's military men and women live by. Never leave a fallen warrior behind. Ever. Off the battlefield, Wounded Warrior Project operates with the same goal. We leave no warrior behind. Wounded Warrior Project is a non-profit organization created to help our men and women returning home with the scars of war. Whether those scars are physical or mental, we're here to make sure that they heal. And whether it's helping those with post-traumatic stress disorder live a normal life again, or giving much-needed support to injured warriors in veterans' hospitals, because no one deserves our help more than the men and women who risk their lives to keep us safe. Wounded Warrior Project. We never leave a fallen warrior behind. Ever. Learn more about what we do at woundedwarriorproject.org.
At Shriners Hospitals for Children, there are a million reasons to share love. My buddy Caleb is one of them. This is his story.
Hi, I'm Caleb. I was born with spinal bone disease. I have broken my bones almost 200 times, and I have had 11 surgeries. But I didn't let that stop me.
There are a million reasons to share love, but you only need one. To learn how you can share love, visit loveshriners.org.
You don't have to stick by your radio to hear all of South Coast Tonight. Stream Chris and Marcus on the WBSM app or download their podcast. South Coast Tonight continues now.
Hey, welcome back to the show. I'm Marcus. 508-996-0500 is how you can get in the program. Also taking messages on the WBSM app chat if you'd like to chime in on the conversation or any conversation. You know, I talked briefly about the Royals' visit to Boston. Don't have much to say beyond that unless you have more to add to it. You know, they came to present some awards for climate sustainability. They went to a Celtics game. They did that, and that's it. I do want to talk a little bit later more about Biden's visit to Boston. I think that's a lot more consequential, especially electorally for Congress, and we'll definitely talk about that a little bit more in the next hour. But one thing I did want to mention, I know Jess Machado's gotten a pretty firm grasp on this story, but it's the struggle for a new direction for the MassGOP after they've been, pretty summarily embarrassed in this last 2022. I mean, the National Republican Party has to feel pretty embarrassed based on the election results. They lost some pretty winnable elections, but and they didn't get control of the Senate despite it being a 50-50 tie and having very winnable races in an odd year, which they're supposed to do well in. But, I mean, it couldn't be more embarrassing for the GOP than what happened in in 2022. Obviously, you lost 2 sheriff's races that were previously held by Republicans here in Bristol County and in Barnstable County, a DA race in Barnstable County that was held, the Cape and Islands district that was previously held by a Republican for 40 years. 40 years, Republicans held the the county DA's office, and they lost, I think, pretty handedly, actually. The Republican lost pretty handedly in that election. So, there's a whole conversation about some soul searching in the state Republican Party. There's some candidates that have emerged for chairman. That's like internal elections. There's nothing people can particularly vote on or support in general. I guess you could ask your state committee member to vote on a particular person. There are, I believe, 1 man and 1 woman state committee member for the Republican Party per Senate district. Per Senate district, there's 1 man, 1 woman state Republican committee member. And so, I don't know. Here's my whole thing with it. I think a guy like Jim Lyons, they want to blame everything on him. And yeah, he's definitely not been a competent leader. He's been, I think, pretty buffoonish in his leadership of the Republican Party, especially in the areas of like sabotaging good candidates. They were actively trying to sabotage Anthony Amore, who, I mean, it wasn't a close race, but it was still the closest statewide race. They actively sabotaged a state rep race in which one of Jim Lyons' friends, I was listening to Howie, one of Jim Lyons' friends was telling people in a district up in Gloucester that was held by Republicans to vote a write-in candidate for Republican, and the Democrat is heading to a recount, is now up by 17 votes. 17 votes. Democrats up by 17 votes in this recount, and there were 60 write-ins. That's a seat that was held by Republicans that will probably switch to Democrat. And part of the reason is because Lyons' group is telling people to vote a write-in in a race that they should have won. And now the Democrat's going to win. 60 write-ins. The Democrats up by 17 votes in a district that was long held by the Republican Party. There's another one, Lenny Mira. He's a longtime Republican state rep. I believe he's losing in his race too. And that's headed to a recount, or that is in the process of being recounted. And on top of that, they lost the state rep race. They lost the state rep race on the Cape because Tim Whalen, who was the state rep from Brewster for a long time on the Cape, ran for sheriff, and he lost to Donna Buckley, who I had on last week. You can check out the column on her on WBSM.com. Lost to Donna Buckley. And his race, his open seat that was held by him for a long time, was a pretty well-liked guy, pretty safe bet to be reelected. His seat flipped Democrat. So they're probably going to lose 3 seats out of what I think was a 29-seat caucus out of 140 in the House. They weren't able to pick up any Senate seats. Anytime a Senate seat that's been held by a Republican has been open in the last few years, a Democrat has won that. You saw Sue Moran. Win the Senate race that was vacated by Vinnie DiMacedo in Plymouth. There was another one I can't think of. That caucus just a few years ago used to be 7 members, and now it used to be 7 members, and now it's, I think, 3. They've lost 5. I think it's hard to blame all that on Jim Lyons. He is bad, and he definitely would need to go. I think it's to blame all that on one guy, I think, is pretty short-sighted, because I think it's just like broadly the Republican Party. It seems like most people in the country, I think, are summarily rejecting the general platforms of the Republican Party. And in Massachusetts, I think they had an opportunity for the more Baker-esque type of guy in the primary election on the governor's race in Chris Doty versus, definitely the outspoken Trump guy in Jeff Deal in the governor's race. And the voters went with Jeff Deal, right? They went with Jeff Deal. Jeff Deal was outspent Jeff Deal was outspent. You had a lot of people behind him, a lot of people behind Chris Doty. I mean, a lot of people behind Chris Doty that mattered. And it didn't matter. Jeff Deal won that race fairly easily. Now, you could argue Chris Doty basically ran out of time. People were just urging him to run because they thought they needed a better candidate and all of that. That's all well and good, but the fact is they didn't have that candidate in the first place. They had to urge Chris Doty to run. So, I mean, I think a lot of that has to do with the Republican Party in Massachusetts not really putting forward good candidates and not having like a cohesive, strong policy platform. I think they're in a position right now where you have to build from the ground up. They have, to get relevance, they basically have like a decades-long project of really grassroots, and I know this word gets thrown around too much, grassroots coalition building. You have to start with municipal races. You have to start with city council, select board, school committee member races and build your way up. And they seem woefully unequipped to do that. And I think a lot of that has to do with, I think a lot of people aren't on board with the broader Republican culture war stuff. I think if you present a more like, what they used to be is like the business party or whatever, the more, the fiscal conservative stuff, I think that works. But the broader culture war stuff, the CRT stuff and, all the weird transgender positions and all of that, I think that's been rejected summarily by the voters, especially in Massachusetts. So, I think it's more than just Jim Lyons. I think it's the entire perspective and party platform that people seem to be just rejecting out of hand. All right, I'm going to take a break. I'll be right back.
WBS
Marcus, this is South Coast Tonight. 508-996-0500 is how you can get in the program. Chris isn't with me tonight, but he'll be back on Wednesday. And we'll be here for the rest of the week. We do have, I think we'll have a fill-in on Thursday because I'm going to the Town Square Media Christmas party. But I think we'll have a fill-in on Thursday, but tomorrow will be here. Wednesday will be here. Friday will be here. And we've got some good guests planned throughout the week to talk about some of the big local and national stuff. I do want to talk about an issue in the next hour that's both local and national, which is President Biden's visit to Boston. President Biden's visit to Boston. He's come to Massachusetts quite a few times since he's been elected. He went to Somerset, Brayton Point for that famous climate speech. He came to Boston more recently, and now he was back. And he was back because he basically because of the Georgia Senate runoff race. Now you're asking, why is Biden coming to Massachusetts for the Georgia Senate runoff? I think there's a good reason for it, and we'll talk about a little bit about that. And I'll be taking your calls and app chat messages at 508-996-0500. That's how you can get in the program. The Georgia Senate runoff, again, is tomorrow, Tuesday. And while the Senate is under Democratic control has basically been decided, this still does have some broader implications on how the Senate will operate, right? Which senators will have more power than others. It'll come at a time when, it'll come at a time when Joe Manchin won't be able to gum everything up, but the House Republicans will, because they're going to have